cold case spanning almost 3 decades in Barry County is coming to a close today.
The sheriff's office says 3 men were arrested in connection to the 1999 death of Justin Hocutt of Seligman.
A 14-year-old was last seen alive the morning of October 9th of 1999. About 22 hours later, his body was found on some train tracks near his home.
On October 1999, a 14-year-old boy in Seligman, Missouri, was last seen alive at a house down the road from his own. 22 hours later, he was dead on railroad tracks, struck by a train. For 27 years, that was the whole story. A tragic accident on a stretch of track a boy shouldn't have been walking. Then, in July 2026, 3 brothers were arrested and charged with his murder. There was no DNA match, no single piece of evidence that cracked the case open, just decades of fragments, lost evidence, buried testimony, and a family that refused to stop asking questions, finally pieced back together. This is the story of Justin Hocutt. But how do you keep asking the same question for 27 years when nobody can give you an answer? How do you keep believing that someone will eventually tell you what happened to a child who never got the chance to grow up? Welcome back to Missing Hour. Let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. And to everyone who's already subscribed, shared an episode, or left a comment on a previous case, thank you, genuinely. This channel only reaches more people because you keep passing these stories along. Justin Hocutt was born in August 1985 in Arkansas to Bonnie and Tim Hocutt. His aunts, Tammy Tolbert and Paula Roney, remember a kid who loved animals, rode his bike everywhere, and collected baseball cards, the kind of ordinary detail that sticks with people for decades. His parents' marriage was difficult, and it ended when Justin was about 10. His mother stayed in Nebraska. His father moved first to Pea Ridge, Arkansas, then later to Seligman, Missouri, to live with Justin's grandparents. Justin eventually joined him there, enrolling at Southwest School and settling into a neighborhood he'd only known for a few months before it became the place his life ended. He was seeing a girl who lived next door, in a house shared by her mother, Brenda Scott and Harold Johnson. Because that's the cruelest part of a case like this. The world remembers the crime. His family remembers the boy. In the early morning hours of October 9th, 1999, Justin was at that house. Sometime between 4 and 5 a.m., according to the probable cause statement filed decades later, someone inside discovered Justin and the girl together. The account investigators were given at the time was simple. Justin was woken up, told to leave, and walked out on his own, headed back toward his father and grandparents' house. 22 hours later, his body was found on the railroad tracks near his home, struck by a train. So where had Justin been during those missing 22 hours? And more importantly, why did his final moments look nothing like the simple accident investigators had initially been given? There was a problem with that story from the start. The tracks weren't on the direct route back to his father's house. They sat across the road and up an embankment, off to the side of the path he would have actually walked. If Justin really had left alive and gone straight home, he shouldn't have ended up there at all. Investigators initially treated the railway as the primary crime scene, since that's where the body was found. The impact of the train had disturbed the area enough that it was hard to separate what the train had done from anything that happened before it arrived. The accident theory didn't hold up under scrutiny. Toxicology showed no drugs or alcohol in Justin's system, and nothing suggested he was suicidal. The 2 explanations investigators would normally reach for first were both ruled out early. The only thing supporting the accident version was the account from inside the neighboring house, that he'd left alive, on his own, for reasons nobody could explain. That account was the entire foundation of the case for years. For Justin's family, that must have been an unbearable kind of uncertainty. Years later, that foundation was challenged. According to the probable cause statement, what followed the discovery inside the house wasn't Justin being sent home. It was an assault. Investigators allege the confrontation started because Justin was caught with the girl that night, and the household reacted with violence instead of walking him out. Witnesses described him being struck and a rope placed around his neck. Others mentioned objects that may have been used against him. The specific details varied by witness, but the shift in the underlying story was significant. Justin may never have walked out of that house under his own power. If that account is true, then Justin didn't simply disappear into the night. He may have been hurt inside a house where he believed he was safe. That raised a harder question. If he didn't leave on his own, was he already dead by the time he reached the tracks, or still alive? One theory held Justin was killed before he reached the railway, and the train destroyed the evidence of what happened first. The later investigation reached the opposite conclusion. According to the probable cause statement, the doctor who performed Justin's autopsy determined that Justin was alive when he was placed on the tracks. That distinction changes what the railway represents in this case. Not a place a body was left, but part of what caused his death. The complete autopsy report has never been made public. What exists is an investigator's summary of the doctor's conclusion, not the full medical record. And that detail is devastating to think about. Because if Justin was alive when he was placed there, then his final moments weren't an accident. Someone made a decision about what would happen to him. This is what the case alleges, not a proven fact. It would take almost 3 more decades for anyone to be charged over it. Once investigators considered that Justin had been attacked inside the house, they were working 2 crime scenes at once. A residence never treated as one, and a railway scene already disturbed by the time anyone looked elsewhere. That's a hard position to recover from. Evidence at the first scene is often already lost to weather, time, or neglect. Sheriff Danny Boyd later pointed to a flaw in the original interviews. Several were conducted inside the homes of possible suspects, not neutral ground, and it can shape what someone says with the person they might implicate standing nearby. How much truth can survive when the first questions are asked in the wrong place, under the wrong circumstances? The physical evidence held up no better. Early on, a pair of work boots was turned in with what appeared to be blood on them, real physical evidence. Briefly, in a case that had almost none. They were later lost by law enforcement, and nobody has ever accounted for them. Around the same time, Justin's grandparents, still living next door to the Johnson and Scott household, say they were harassed for months, including gunfire at their home. They reported it. Nothing came of it. Imagine losing a child and then having to live beside the people you believed might know what happened. How do you sleep at night with that kind of fear sitting just outside your door? The years that followed created their own problems. People connected to the case died. Memories changed. Evidence sat in storage, waiting on a technology or a witness that hadn't arrived yet. In 2001, 2 years after his son's death, Justin's father, Timmy Hokut, shot and wounded 2 of the men who would eventually be charged with the murder, Mark and David Scott. There's no record he was ever convicted for it. He was later convicted on separate federal drug charges and died in federal prison in 2020, without ever seeing the case reach an arrest. He died without seeing the answer he had spent years waiting for. And Justin's family was still waiting. Investigators returned to the file periodically. Additional interviews were conducted in 2009, 2010, and 2011 after new information surfaced each time. None of it produced a case. People seemed to know more than they were saying, but knowing isn't evidence. For most of 2 decades, the case stayed suspended between suspicion and proof. If you're new to this channel, every case here is rebuilt from court filings and primary reporting, not shortcuts. Subscribe if that's the kind of true crime you're here for. In 2020, Danny Boyd became sheriff of Barry County and made Justin's case a priority. He wasn't looking at a fresh scene. He was looking at a file more than 20 years old, with aged witnesses, some no longer reachable, and evidence that needed re-examining from scratch. 20 years had already passed. But someone was finally willing to ask the questions again. Boyd assembled a team: Lieutenant Gary Allen, Major Angela Cole, Sergeant Abby Parsons, Detectives Jeremy Berner and Billy Forrester, and evidence technician Sarah Miner, names absent from the 1999 file, to retrace the route between Justin's house, the neighboring residence, and the tracks. Some of the original evidence had never even reached the state crime lab. In February 2026, the sheriff's office requested help from the Missouri State Highway Patrol's Division of Drug and Crime Control. Several people connected to the case now lived out of state. The request became public in May, when Sergeant Bradley German confirmed evidence had been resubmitted for testing and appealed to anyone who might still know something. There was no DNA breakthrough. Investigators were direct about that. Instead, they went back to people, re-interviewing witnesses between February and May 2026 and comparing statements against those from 1999. Those witnesses aren't named in the probable cause statement. Several feared for their safety if it became known they'd cooperated, so the document refers to them only by number. That level of caution, almost 3 decades after the crime, says something about how much the fear around this case never actually went away for the people closest to it. Even before any arrests, the case was drawing renewed public attention. In February 2026, a local television crew sat down with Tammy Tolbert for a segment revisiting the case. Neither the family nor the reporters knew an arrest was only months away. 27 years of silence. 27 years of fear. And then, finally, people started talking. That's when overlapping details started to emerge. A rope. Objects: a stick, a cane, a baseball bat, a cast iron skillet, depending on who was asked. Bleach, purchased in bulk around Justin's death, in a nearby apartment that had tested positive for a luminol reaction, though a former detective noted bleach alone can cause that result, raising suspicion without proving anything on its own. Investigators also gathered statements about what people allegedly said after Justin's death, alleged admissions among the Scott family, and conversations between Harold Johnson and Brenda Scott, both since deceased. One witness reportedly told multiple people over the years that Brenda Scott took part in the assault herself, alongside her sons, an account that's never been tested in court, and can't be, since she isn't alive to answer to it. Some accounts also referenced 2 additional people present that night who haven't been publicly identified or charged. And after all those years, the question wasn't simply, What happened to Justin? It was becoming, who was responsible? This is exactly the kind of case this channel exists to cover. Not just the headline, but the full paper trail behind it. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want the next one. By summer 2026, investigators believed they had enough to seek warrants. 3 brothers were named: David Ray Scott, Mark Wesley Scott, and Bobby Ray Scott, stepbrothers to the girl Justin had been seeing that night, and sons of Brenda Scott. After 27 years, there were finally names. But a name is not a conviction. The allegations aren't identical for all 3. The probable cause statement against David Scott is the most detailed, accusing him of taking part in the assault and helping move Justin toward the tracks afterward. The material on Mark and Bobby's conduct is far less specific. Both face the same charge, but the record doesn't spell out what each is accused of. David Scott was arrested in McDonald County, booked into the Barry County Jail, and arraigned July 27th, pleading not guilty. He's held without bond, with a bond hearing before Judge Robert Folk. Mark and Bobby Scott were arrested together in Pulaski County, Arkansas. Mark waived extradition. Bobby did not, giving prosecutors up to 60 days to secure a governor's warrant for his return. All 3 face first-degree murder charges. For nearly 3 decades, Justin's family had no courtroom answer to the question that had followed them since 1999. What they had were his photographs, his belongings, and the baseball cards he'd collected. What they didn't have was an explanation. His aunts kept his memory alive through years of silence, hearing rumors and unverifiable claims that rarely led anywhere. Family friend Patricia Snoderly put the weight plainly. They're not in prison yet, but it finally feels like the case is headed in the right direction. Can you imagine waiting almost 30 years just to hear someone say, "We're finally doing something about it"? Justin stayed 14 in their memories. He never got older, never finished school, never added another card to the collection. The arrests in July 2026 didn't bring certainty. Tammy Tolbert has said the family wondered whether anyone would ever be held accountable, and that this is the first real movement they've had since 1999. The court still has to determine what happened inside that house, and decide what the incomplete autopsy record can prove. Investigators haven't ruled out further arrests, and the case remains open. Justin Hocutt was 14. He never got the chance to become whoever he would have grown into, a detail that's easy to state plainly and hard to actually sit with. Because somewhere inside those baseball cards is a version of Justin that never got the chance to grow up. Mark Scott and his brothers have been charged. They have not been convicted. What happens next will be decided in a courtroom, weighed against evidence and testimony 3 decades old, not settled by a headline and not settled here. For a family that spent 27 years without a single answer, that alone is a different kind of ending than the one they'd braced for. For 27 years, Justin's family had questions. Now, for the first time, those questions have a chance to be answered in court. If you want more cases researched to this depth, verified against court filings, not shortcuts, subscribe. New cases go up every week. Justin never got to see what his life could have become, but his family never stopped remembering the life he had. Some files never close. This one just started moving again. Thanks for watching and stay safe.